All right. So over the past couple of years, there's been a lot that's come out about mind muscle connection. Is it a real thing? Is it something that you should pay a lot of attention to? So today I want to dive into the actual science of the mind muscle connection because I think there are some things that are maybe interpreted wrong about mind muscle connection that may make a little more sense to some individuals. But for the most part, it's not about what you lift or how heavy that you lift in accordance to the progress that you'll make. It's about how you think about the lift and how you maybe even visualize and or quote unquote feel that contraction when you're in the gym lifting weights. So we always have to remember have intention over just creating tension within the muscle. So just because the weight is moving does not mean the targeted muscle is doing any other work, right? So we have two kind of main trains of thought here. You have external focus and you have internal focus. So the external focus is going to be just moving that weight from point A to point B, right? Then the internal focus is going to be about thinking about that contraction and squeezing the targeted muscle. So if we think about a chest press on like a barbell bench press, right? The external focus is you just literally grabbing the bar and moving your hands up and down, moving the weight from point A to point B. We're not really focused on if the chest is working, if the triceps are doing a lot of the movement, if the anterior delts are doing a lot of the movements. We're just moving that weight from point A to point B. That's what I see a lot of the time for most individuals. They're just moving the weight. They have no intent behind it. They're just moving it to move it, essentially. Then, if we look at the internal focus, you're actually thinking about, all right, when I'm pushing this barbell up in this barbell bench press, I'm not only thinking about, pushing this bar up. In my mind, I'm thinking about, I'm trying to take, what's a good example? Like if you take a pen, right, and you try to, do it like that. That's what I'm trying to do with the bar, right? I'm trying to bend the bar, and at the same time, I'm also trying to push myself away from the weight. So I'm not thinking about just pushing the weight up. I'm personally thinking about having my hand set, and then as I'm going up, I'm trying to bend the bar, and I'm pushing myself away from the weight instead of just pushing the weight up and down. And the difference in between these two trains of thoughts are that intentional that intentional focus is going to shift from the load, mainly moving from momentum and involving those secondary muscle groups to just using that targeted muscle. So again, sticking with the barbell bench press reference, if you just use that external focus and you're not truly just limiting what you're doing, the majority of it to the pecs, right? You're going to use a lot of triceps, a lot of leg drive, a lot of anterior delts to get that weight up. But if you really think about it and just focus on the actual chest moving, um, you're going to obviously cut that weight down a lot, which is then going to reduce injuries as well too. But it's going to have you focusing more on that targeted muscle. And then so there was a study that was done by the European Journal of Applied Physiology that demonstrated that you could actually increase the amount of activation in, I think in the trial that they did, it was just the pecs and the triceps, during a bench press, simply by focusing on them. So I was talking to a guy in the gym yesterday, and he was talking about how bad that he hated training his back just because he can't feel the movement. I said, well, if you think about it, we can't see our backs while we're working them out, right? A lot of the back work is going off of feel, whereas if you're doing a bicep curl and you're standing in front of the mirror, you can actually see the biceps curl the weight up, right? It's kind of what this is talking about. So if you've ever been doing like a bench press, right? And you see another individual tapping their chest, right? Trying to get their chest to fire. This is kind of the same thing. So again, this just all goes back to not just moving the weight for the sake of moving it, but actually thinking about what you're doing, during the movement. Another example is like a leg press, right? Um, a lot of people just get into a leg press and they just press with their lower half, right? All they're thinking about is getting that weight up off of them. If you really dial it down and think about, all right, as I'm coming down, I want my knee and and my toe to stack over each other, right? And then when I get into to the bottom, I want to use my quads to push this weight up. I don't want you to use your feet in essence to push the weight up. I want you to contract your quads to get that weight to go up. When you start thinking in aspects like that, again, the weight that you're going to be using is going to go way down, but the mechanical tension that you're creating inside of the muscle is going to be so much better. Um, and again, this is not something that you're going to go to the gym this afternoon and try to employ, and it's going to work like that. Like it takes a long time to get to this point to where you're so honed in with that mind muscle connection that it's like a night and day, kind of like a light switch thing. It just takes time to build that up. But if you and constantly work at it, you'll get to the point to where you're using the lightest weight possible, but getting a better contraction and a better stimulus just from doing this method. So if we look at, how does this differ the outcomes if we're looking at muscle gain, hypertrophy? So we know that connection is going to equal greater growth. Again, if you're doing a tricep extension and you don't feel your triceps working at all, as opposed to if you take it slow and you really think about the tricep squeezing, or you're going to get a way better pump in your triceps if you actually connect with your triceps and think about it, right? Same with activation. Over time, as you do this more and more often, again, this is kind of going back to what I said earlier. It's not going to be a night and day thing. It's going to be to where you're going to have this greater, um, hypertrophy signaling over time to where like it's going to gradually build up. That's the way if you see, some high level bodybuilders, right? They go in the gym and they just grab absurd amounts of weights and just their form is so sloppy. They're just, pulling a deadlift off the floor. Their form is awful. It looks sloppy, but their physique is growing, and that's because they took the time, earlier in their career to make sure that they had that proper connection and that proper activation to the point to where, if they're doing a back row like a barbell, row, they don't have to think about, how far is my hands, out to where they need to be? Do I need to retract my scapula first and then pull, kind of thing? Like it just kind of automatically fires. So again, over time, that signaling is going to increase. So again, I'm referencing another study. There was a long-term study done in the frontiers in sports and active living that compared that internal versus external focus over 8 weeks. And as you may guess, that internal focus, the ones that were actually thinking about what they were doing in the gym, saw a significantly greater muscle thickness. And this study mainly focused on bicep thickness. They just had individuals go in there again who, every single rep was a quality rep, but they thought about what they were doing the entire, every single rep was intentional, right? There was no just grabbing the weight and just curling it. It was, a very slow, controlled, see the bicep, contract kind of thing. And in, return, they seen greater muscle thickness. And then, kind of piggybacking off of that same story, what that mechanism that led to that result was that it's had higher motor recruitment during those sets, which again led to greater mechanical tension on the individual fibers. So again, this is just going to come from you being able to focus more on the movement that you're doing at hand, and then in turn, that's going to be able to recruit more of these higher motor units to actually help you with the contraction, get a better squeeze, get a better pump, things of that nature. So I think a lot of people, when they think about certain movements, like they think certain movements don't need as much focus or much, you know, I guess focus might be the best word. So like for instance, like big movers like deadlifts, squats, barbell rows, big compound movers, right? A lot of people think that those don't need that same focus, that it's just one of them movements to where you just grip it and rip it, right? Like a barbell row. It's on the ground, you got three or four plates aside, you just grab it and pull it, right? And you're gonna grow. But these big movers also need big focus. So our barbell row should be as focused as a bicep curl. Now, the problem is is in movements like, a lat pull down or like a hamstring curl, right? The body is going to naturally find the path of least resistance, whether that be you using some form of momentum or you're going to pull the low back into it. And so to fix this, what you're going to use is these specific cues to help you make sure that you're not tapping into that path of least resistance. Like for example, if you're doing the lat pull down, you should never just think about, all right, grabbing the weight and then just pulling it. You want to think, all right, elbows in front of you and you're driving your elbows down again instead of just grabbing the bar and pulling it, right? With doing that, that's going to reduce that bicep takeover and increase that total lat involvement. So even if you are a big believer of using the big movers like squats, deadlifts, barbell bench press, barbell military press. These still need to be movers that, if you're doing a squat, it's just not you unrack it and you go down and come right back up. It needs to be where it's controlled on the way down, on the way up, or you're using your quads to explode up. So let's see. Um, let's see. And then we have to keep in mind managing the load. So the biggest issue that I see with a lot of people is just they're not able to leave the ego at home. So mind muscle connection is most effective at moderate intensities, 60 to 8% inside of that one rep max. So uh, research indicates that when loads become too heavy, 80% or more of your one rep max, the body is going to then shift back into an external focus. Again, just moving this weight from point A to point B. Let's just get it over with instead of actually being intentional, with the lift and using, that targeted connection. So this could be like, if you're in a I don't know, a squat, right? And your max ever is 405 and you put 395 on there, right? And that's your one rep max is 405. Well, your brain and you probably is going to be, thinking about, all right, once I unrack this, you're going to be thinking, all right, just get down in the hole. Hopefully nothing pops, and then just get up and rack it, right? Well, when you get to that point, one, it's too heavy. Why are you even doing a one rep max at that point? And you're not even thinking about using the quads at this point. Your only thought process is to get that weight up. Um, so that's why I'm not a big fan of going super, super low reps unless that's your goal, right? Like a power lifter, but that's not a lot of people's goal is just to be insanely strong for one or two reps. Obviously, injuries happen a lot in that rep range. Um, but again, this all just ties back to, using that mind muscle connection to ensure that every rep is a quality rep. So again, if the load that you're using is just flat out too heavy, I don't care how focused that you think that you are. If you, you're going to be more concerned about just getting the weight off of you, getting the set done instead of, actually using the targeted muscle, in accordance to just not hurting yourself. That's why that you'll never ever see me do any kind of bench press PR or squat PR. And I think it's funny, like I'll see people out in public and they're like, hey man, you work out, don't you? And I'm like, yeah, a little bit. What's your bench? And I'm like, I have no idea. What do you mean you don't know? I'm like, I don't bench press, man. I've never really done anything less than 8 reps on a bench press. Said anything less than that is I'm at risk of tearing my pec. And they don't, oh yeah, 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 whatever. And then, they go into these stories of how they used to be XYZ, whatever. So that's why I never have that answer as far as like what's my max bench or my max squat or whatever, because I don't put myself in those predicaments to where the body just has to quote unquote survive and move that weight from point A to point B. Then so your action steps to actually start using this is one thing that I like to do is static holds. So if you're doing a bicep curl, right? And once you get to the very top of of that movement, hold it for 1 to 2 seconds. Like actually, find what you're squeezing, right? Once you get to the top, like really focus on squeezing your biceps, right? Hold that feel and then go down and then go down again. If you work out with a workout partner while you're doing that, have them touch your bicep. If you work out by yourself and you're doing like a single arm tricep extension, as you're going down, reach over and touch it. I mean, you actually feeling it is going to help make that connection a lot easier. And then, as always, I'm a big component of using, negatives. Um, so, like if you're, doing a deadlift, right, and you get up to the top of it, don't just drop it. Have that 2 to 3 second negative. You have to feel that muscle lengthening under tension. And then again, just having more control of it. So, at the end of the day, mind muscle connection to me is very important just because if you're not intent with what you're doing and you don't actually feel a connection in that intended muscle, you're leaving results. You're leaving, a potential progress on the table just because you're not making a full connection with a muscle, and you'll get so much out of the muscle if you can actually connect with it and get a good pump, get a good a contraction, and then outside of all of that, things have to be in place, for that to happen too, like proper hydration, proper electrolyte balance, proper food in your system, things of that nature too. But um, outside of that, if you can really, delve into that thinking of, I don't just need to move the weight from point A to point B. I really need to, if you're doing, I don't know, a hamstring curl, you really need to just focus on pulling with the hamstrings and not worried about, oh, well, last week I did 100 pounds at 12 reps. Let me go up to 125 pounds to try to get 12 reps. If that, 12 reps last week at 112 and on rep 9 you start to felt your low back, well, you probably just need to dial things back and actually try to use the hamstrings, to pull with. Um, like for instance, on my first leg day of the week, I do 3 sets of lying hamstring curls. The first 2 sets are using 2 legs, and then the last set, I'm just using 1 leg. And then on that, I'm actually taking my opposite hand and touching my hamstring as I do that movement, just so that, hey, after I get done with this, my hamstrings are cooked, right? And my low back doesn't hurt because I was able to actually pull, with the hamstrings and not tap into that lower back, if that makes sense.